Hello, I'm Dr. Katherine Horton. I'm making this video to spell out the situation, the global situation, in the simplest terms possible. And I have made very many videos about the different aspects of the intelligence agencies' assaults on the civilian population, about the microwave weapons used, about remote neural monitoring, and all the many aspects of these crimes against humanity. I also put out many appeals, I think a total of 6 public appeals to MI5 and the BND, who are involved in my targeting, the assaults and mutilation of me. And also I spoke to a senior member of the Swiss intelligence agency, the NDB, and I requested a cease and desist. Since then I have written again to the NDB, this time to the head, Markus Seiler, and again requested a cease and desist. All of this to no avail, and I would like to explain again to these gentlemen and whoever in the world is listening what this means and how very much they screw themselves by not listening, by not stopping this. They don't realize, but they are. That's the beauty of it. So every shot that gets fired into my head is actually a shot into their rear side, but they just don't understand. And I will explain why that is the case. It is somewhat more complicated. I was trying to, assuming a certain standard of intelligence, I was trying to spell it out, leave some things unsaid, but I realized that with the sort of category of man we're dealing with in the intelligence agencies, you just can't do that. You have to spell it out in the simplest terms so that everybody actually understands what's going on. Because based on everything I've seen, and I've now been harassed and targeted and, well, certainly terrorized by British, by German and by Swiss intelligence for over half a decade. I have been physically mutilated for almost a year and a half, so getting there. So I have now seen a lot. I have seen some of their methods. I've certainly mapped out, or they pantomimed out their methods. I've read the reports from other victims. I have a very good feel for what's going on here. And based on what I've seen, I think I also understand that they really don't understand what the hell it is that they're doing. They really don't. And if you doubt that, just remind yourself that MI5 is an organization that until very recently had the tip of a knob as its logo. And all the thousands of super spies that worked for them, none of them could figure out that the sign above the door was actually a joke at their own expense. But there we are. So this is what we're dealing with. So it's quite complex, so I'm trying to start off somewhere and break it down. I hope it makes sense. But I would like to summarize, before I launch into the actual current situation, I would like to briefly summarize all the different aspects I have summarized in previous videos. So I have explained, and the whiteboard, which I don't wipe because everything I've written there is relevant, kind of shows the different topics. So if you don't understand where some of these writings come from, just watch my previous videos and you can figure it out. I started off with explaining deep capture as a natural process in pyramid organizations. I explained that in compartmentalized organizations that have extra compartmentalization here and here, deep capture is even faster, even more deadly, because a system cannot recover by itself because of the compartmentalization. If anything dodgy happens in this part of the department, this part of the department will not hear about it because of the compartmentalization, and so on. And here, if there's a division, an honest person doesn't know about the dodgy stuff that goes on, and so on and so on. So capturing compartmentalized organizations is child's play. For criminals, for foreign powers, it just is. That's just compartmentalization and the need-to-know policy. If you've got the Official Secrets Act and international equivalents of that, it means you have an opaque organization. To the outside world, it is entirely opaque. No one can look inside, and no one from the inside can speak with the outside world. Now that is a deep capture machine. Deep capture is not a question of if, it's you know, it's a certainty, and it's not even a question of when anymore, because it will happen as soon as the bottom tier. If you started off with a totally green organization, everything is on green. If you've got one psychopath, the time taken to capture this organization is for this psychopath to rise through the ranks. And, you know, these hierarchies might be quite tall, but actually the number of hierarchies is much smaller than the total number of employees, which makes it the psychopath magnet, as Dr. Paul Marco puts it. So this is the situation. Now, intelligence agencies have been around for centuries, for absolutely centuries, because they are so powerful. So running your own spies and spying on others and getting an advantage on them, it has been around forever, right? I mean, it's the, you know, the second oldest profession, as they say, or sometimes the oldest, and it's very much akin to the other one. So, you know, there we are. And because of this, all spy organizations have been around for so long, we can say for sure that every single intelligence agency in the world, believe it or not, is already in deep capture. It follows from simple systems analysis. They can go on until they're blue in the face that they're not, but the laws of physics say that they are, and that's it. The laws of physics win, end of story. Now, it just comes down to what the interests of the people are who have captured this organization. And we can talk more about who captured this organization or these organizations. Now, when you have this and you have these deep capture machines already long ago in deep capture, it doesn't just stop there. Psychopaths will want to rise to the top, and the intelligence agencies do attract psychopaths more than any other profession, because, you know, you can figure out why, but it caters to their predilections, essentially. But when you have that, you won't just have a couple of psychopaths at the top, you will have a thick layer of totally, utterly whacked out psychopaths, and this layer will be so thick that beyond a certain point they will all be proper, you know, natural born psychopaths. Okay, or made. You can also turn people into psychopaths, but, you know, they will be pro at being psychopaths. So this is what we have, and having an organization like that at the heart of all our governments is, of course, inviting trouble, and it has invited trouble, and now there's a lot of it. That's not it. That's not all. I also made a video about shedding, about, you know, please look it up if you haven't seen it. That explains how the alumni or the employees who leave this organization leak out and very quickly create parallel organizations the same size as a national intelligence agency. This happens around the world, and you just have to think about it for longer than 3 seconds, and you figure out that by now there must be this international intelligence conglomerate of essentially psychopaths, criminals, and seriously degenerate people who have been empowered with special technologies, special tools, and special privileges above the rest of society for absolutely no good reason. And that's what we're dealing with now. We have two parallel societies. We've got the insiders, who are, if you like, as Karen Austin Fitz put it, they have a one-way mirror. So the people inside the spy organizations can access all the databases, can find out everything about everybody, have their, you know, friends and pals and all these organizations, and can, you know, get at the informants network at the drop of a hat, and so on. So they have this huge competitive advantage, and there's normal society. And ironically, because of the selection process of the intelligence agencies, and because it caters to degenerates and psychopaths, what this is, it is like a suction device that sucks out all the really ruthless, really degenerate people out of society into the intelligence agencies, and then empowers them above the rest of society. Now that this recipe is inviting trouble should be obvious to children, okay? And that's what we have. And all of this just goes back, excuse me, to the compartmentalization and the secrecy of the intelligence agencies. That's it. That's all you need. And the same applies to secrecy related to military. Oops, that's one of my shielding panels collapsing over there. So as I'm standing here, I have to shield a window to a training, one of these degenerate training camps. And it's the building which has the satanic goat on top. The satanic life-size plastic black goat appeared the day after the first assassination attempt that I survived, 3 days after my first High Court hearing against British intelligence. So I've got this satanic goat, and sometimes it has a what looks like a flat antenna on top, sometimes it doesn't. And when it does, I get shot in the head from that direction, so I have to put shielding panels there. And, you know, in the flat below the goat, you have, you know, a flat that mysteriously has the lights on every single time I'm up until 3 or 4 a.m., you know. I mean, weird. Of course, not that weird if you have a shift service of degenerates being trained up how to shoot into people. So, you know, that's what we're dealing with. This is Zurich in 2017. This is not Basra. This is Zurich in the year 2017. And what we are now dealing with is the intelligence agencies have gone so degenerate and have been unleashed on the population to shoot some of the most dedicated, the people with the highest integrity and some of the most intelligent people to bits with microwave weapons with which you can shoot through walls and certainly shoot through windows and cause brain damage. So this is what they've been doing to me now for over a year. And the question is, how on earth did we end up here? So, well, it starts with these pyramid organizations with compartmentalization and external secrecy, and these deep capture machines have been deep captured like this. As soon as they were created, they were already created, captured by whoever created them, but you know, even if you assume that they weren't captured, you realize that they will be captured after just a couple of years anyway. So this is what we have now. Now the question is, what exactly is going on when the intelligence agencies start to shoot up their own population? And not just any old members of their population, but those of highest integrity. What exactly is going on? And they start shooting up the people of sometimes very high intelligence and murdering them. Now, there are precedents to this. And the precedents are the Second World War and how the Gestapo and Germany invaded Poland. They marched in, and before they marched in, they identified all the intellectuals who could be a threat because they could warn the population. And they identified them before the war. So by the time the war kicked off, they just went in, rounded up those people, lined them up and shot them in the head. And with that, the rest of Polish society, these were the people who had either the time or intellectual capacity, or had spent a lot of hours analyzing current affairs and understanding what is happening. And as soon as you shot them in the head, this knowledge was lost, and then this country could be taken over. Now, similar things happened in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, all around the world. Over and over. It's almost like the same template has been played out. So if you look at this past precedent, the historical record, I think you'll find that as soon as you have intelligent people being shot to bits in large numbers and being tortured and mutilated, usually that country is going to be gutted very quickly by a foreign power. And then you say, yes, but what about the gulags in Russia? You know, Solzhenitsyn was in one of those, and, you know, there wasn't a foreign power in Russia. Well, actually, as a matter of fact, there was, but it was much more clandestine. It was much more clandestine, and it was the financiers of the people who actually ran the revolution. They were funded from abroad, and they were funded to essentially asset strip the Tsar. And they did. They asset stripped him, and then they killed him and his entire family. And then they killed a bunch of Russians, like so many. It was more Russian killed than in the Second World War, you know. So that's sort of the precedent. And then you also have China, again, you know, the same story. It's almost like a carbon copy of what happened to Russia. Again, intellectual people rounded up, murdered, then the communist system brought in, and the country obliterated so that it's reeling. It's still recovering from that. If you look at the number of people and the ingenuity of the Chinese people and their long-standing culture, you can, just using systems analysis, you can figure out that by now we should be just so advanced in terms of science and culture and insight. But we're not. We're still at the stage where intellectuals are being shot in the head. So what happened? So there's some sort of force that keeps intellectuals down. If you really want to have a boom, you just allow intellectuals to, get to the top and then drive you upwards. So in one of my videos where I explained the system, I explained about the difference between uplift and conquering systems that give you drift down. And I also try to explain that what we have now and what we had throughout the past millennia, these are legacy systems that are conquering systems, okay? So every single time you saw colonialism, you saw the Second World War, you saw communism, you saw many, many other things. Those are legacy systems, and they are specifically designed towards conquering. They are conquering systems. This is how one country, if you like, conquered another. But if you look closely, it wasn't even a country, because most of the time there wasn't a referendum that the entire country decided to do something. No, it was an inner cartel. And this inner cartel goes around and then asset strips other nations and acquires their assets. And it acquires them with exactly the same template, and it has done that through the millennia. So the way the Romans did it is pretty much identical to how the cartel did it with Russia and with China. So what exactly are we dealing with now? And now, if you understand the historical record, okay, there are other videos. There's also, I encourage you to watch the videos by Sean Ross, and he explains the cartel structure in greatest detail. I really encourage you. He also explains the people who were behind the Second World War and communism and how that relates now to the cartels we have now. So this is all fine. This is now the background, okay? This is the historical context. And the pattern to spot, if you're a systems analyst, even if you're not a historian, is to say, well, every single time intellectuals started being rounded up and being mutilated and murdered, either a war followed or some very large level asset stripping followed in that country. So just from the historical precedent, it should be a word of warning when the intellectuals start being mutilated and the people of integrity. And then also when you have what we have now with the victims of the intelligence agencies, 70% women. This is the statistics I found. When you have mostly women being targeted, it has the signature of sexual violence, certainly, but it also has the signature of war crimes. And why would it have that? Well, it's because when one marauding army goes into another country, traditionally, when you had nation states fighting each other, you denigrate the other side by raping their women. Okay, so in the olden days, in the tribes, if a tribe just went to another tribe, they would just grab the women, okay, and you would denigrate the men by showing them that they can get their women and do whatever the hell they want with them because they have won the battle, or won the war or whatever. And this stays, and this in the psychology of these fucked in the head degenerate men is a constant. Nothing has changed, right? They haven't evolved. I mean, of course, they haven't evolved past this, right? We all know that. So that's exactly what you have. But it works also nation states, and it's actually an innate impulse in men. So when they go around conquering, this is first of all their prize, but it's also a form of celebrating the victory and ensuring the defeat. It's a psychological thing. It's to bring home to the other party, the other men, that they have lost. Okay, it's kind of like we've got all the bitches now, sort of thing, kind of. But it holds up. Okay, so when you have this, that women are being mutilated, and it looks like the sex ratio looks like a war crime. That's another indication to say, hang on, is there some sort of invading army having some sort of war and just taking our women and then celebrating the victory by mutilating them, by raping them in front of our eyes, and we men of that nation, we just, can't do anything. right? Because there's this second instance as well, you know, a second lead to what exactly is going on. And I would say that is exactly right. It's not by accident that these things are happening, that you have death camps, all right, where people are shot to bits by the intelligence agencies in your country, and it's mostly women. Now, women have never been a national security issue in the history of mankind, for obvious reasons, right? For freaking obvious reasons. So when you suddenly start shooting up your own women, and if these women are intellectuals, right, the women aspect, the intellectual aspect, and the fact that you've got death camps all indicate that you are in, or you are about to experience, a foreign takeover. That's just what it is. So, given that we see the same phenomenon around the world, and women are being shot to bits, like Karen Stewart, she's an NSA whistleblower. She even has seen and has tracked down some of her stalkers, and she knows that they are tied to NSA. And she has written about this, and NSA Admiral Rogers is so incompetent or just so plain stupid, he can't stop the targeting of Karen Stewart. Wow, as the head of the frickin' NS-fucking-A, he can't do that. Well, he could if he could be bothered. The fact that he can't be bothered shows that Admiral Rogers hasn't understood the situation. And at this point, he should be an admiral no more. Because he hasn't understood that if this is happening to Karen Stewart, his country is under siege. It's in the biggest national security issue in like the frickin' fucking century since the Second World War. Now, a system analyst can see what happens to Karen Stewart and the fact that she's written to the head of the frickin' fucking NSA, and he can't get his shit together to stop it and tell these old wankers to stop shooting at her and take her off the blacklist. That means that either Mr. Admiral Rogers is part of the foreign takeover, or he's so fucking stupid he doesn't understand that there already is a foreign takeover of the USA. That's what it means. These are the only two options, and none of them are good. Now, if he is, however, part of the problem, he has advertised that. If he's too freaking stupid to understand that there's a problem, he's advertised that. So whichever way we turn it, it's just not very good. So, but this is the reality. You can go to the Techno Crime Fighters forum, you know, we've recorded that with Ramola D. You can listen to Karen Stewart, you can see what's happening to her, and it has been happening. She's being shot to pieces, like I am as well. Now, what on earth is going on? And meanwhile, Ramola, a human rights activist, is being shot to pieces when she's trying to protect the US people in the US against the foreign takeover. Now, this is what's so, you know, amazing. She's of Indian heritage and she is fighting for the national security of the USA. Karen Stewart is an NSA whistleblower, is fighting for the national security of the USA. Here I am, and I'm trying to explain to everybody these issues, trying to fight for the national security of the European countries and the USA. And I'm being shot in the head. What this means is that our intelligence agencies are in deep capture. Okay? They are in deep capture by foreign elements. That's what it means. There's no way around that. They are in deep capture by foreign elements. Now, when a secretive organization is in deep capture, it cannot recover by itself, because the psychos at the top will only recruit psychos. They will not recruit normal people who will bust that criminality wide open. So there's no way for a system that's in deep capture to recover by itself. Problem? Yes, because it takes external force. Now, external force can come in many different ways. It can come from an external power, or when it comes internally, it's either the sacking or the assassination of the head of intelligence. Now China went for the execution of the head of intelligence. The question is, what's the USA going to choose? So Admiral Rogers is also a newest entry to NSA, right? The person before him who, was accused of not doing anything about whistleblower retaliation has been removed. And so far, Admiral Rogers still didn't manage to pick up the phone and stop the microwaving of Karen Stewart. And the thugs who are microwaving her, the pictures are up online. Now for the NSA, it shouldn't take longer than half an hour to find out who the F the people are who are mutilating Karen Stewart. The fact that Admiral Rogers cannot be bothered tells you the US situation. And the women, Karen Stewart, Ramola D, myself, and other women, we are the canaries in the gold mine. If we are being mutilated, you're all gonna die. It's that simple, because there's a foreign takeover. There's a foreign takeover of your country. So, how would that foreign takeover possibly look? What is the foreign entity that could be taking over the US and Europe at the same time in other parts of the globe? Well, because it's a global program, we're looking for a global player. Now, the only global player that actually comes into question is something called the Network of Global Corporate Control. And this is a structure that has been identified in 2011 by a group of Swiss mathematicians at ETH Zurich, who analyzed, I think, 43,000 public companies. And they mapped out the share ownership, so the ownership structure, but also the control structure. This is different because that is the board membership, okay? And they figured out that I think 40% of the global companies these multinational companies are organized into superstructure. Okay, so we have the superstructure, and the superstructure is big. It's it's got 40% of the companies and something like, much larger fraction of the assets and so on. So the assets it's controlling are bigger than nation states. So the network of global corporate control, if you like, is a self-assembled, large collection of companies that are not just that, they're also organized in a very hierarchical structure and have some sort of what the mathematicians call an oxbow structure at the top. So they have mapped out this entity and they call it the super entity. And this super entity is controlling 40% of these largest companies in the world. Now that's a big animal. And that is the only animal big enough that can systematically subvert governments and systematically buy up intelligence agencies by deep capture, So it's fair to say that what we're dealing with now is an all-out attack by the network of global corporate control on all the governments. On all the governments and on all the nation states of the world. And that's what we're dealing with. Now, what does the network of global corporate control do? It takes the people who are integrated into it. This is the people who work for those corporations and are considered to be useful. But it also is their prize asset. And their prize asset is the intelligence conglomerate, the intelligence agencies around the world. Why is that a prize asset? Because once you have captured an intelligence agency, you can do whatever you like. You've access to everything, you can infiltrate everything, you can spy on everybody in that country. You can entirely subvert that country. So the prize assets of the network of global corporate control are, as far as money is concerned, the companies, ostensibly, but in actual fact, the intelligence agencies. So the intelligence agencies are really nothing other than, we call it the enforcement arm or the asset grabbing arm of the network of global corporate control. this is the situation. So we have destruction. I can link the paper. You can see that I'm not making this stuff up. So we have this network of global corporate control, and it has been accumulating money, it has been accumulating assets. And I don't really want to go into the financial details, but they're highly important. But Katherine Horton discusses those in greatest detail, about the assets of the network of global corporate control and what's happening and so on. And it seems to be that this cartel, which at the top is owned by the banking cartel, is bankrupt because of the financial shenanigans that it has been doing, because of tricks it has been playing on nation states and royalty and so on. It has, I think, given out something called the Treaty of Versailles bonds that have been accumulating interest. And if you take the Treaty of Versailles bonds, interest due, it's, as Katherine Horton, I think, explains, it is bigger than country debt. So country debt, being a scam set up by this banking cartel, is null and void in itself because it's a fraudulent financial instrument. But on top of that, it's also wiped by the interest payments on the Treaty of Versailles bonds. So I think in a nutshell that's that. And Katherine Horton is I think the most important woman on the planet right now, because she votes the shares for the US of something called the Global Debt Facility, and that is the assets of the network of global corporate control that have been put into one big trust that now belongs to the World Bank, or to humanity, in other words. So that's the background story, but we still have, until the network of global corporate control is wound down, we have the situation that it owns the intelligence agencies outright. And that is just a fact. People can contest it. People can contest that the intelligence agencies have all morphed into one organization, but I'm sorry. Systems analysis and historical circumstantial evidence and testimony by spies themselves says otherwise. So what we have now is a situation whereby the intelligence agencies around the world have morphed into one. I call it the one agency. And it's mirrored by the same development whereby all the central banks and all the private banks around the world are actually really more or less one, called the one bank, and it stands to reason that the one bank would own the one agency. So this is what we have. We have the intelligence agencies. In actual fact, I don't know what exactly these people are thinking, but in actual real fact, the people calling the shots are not the national governments. The people calling the shots are the banking cartel. And the banking cartel is detached from these national governments. Okay. Now, there we are. That's the situation, okay? And we now have the situation whereby this banking cartel goes around and has identified in all the countries the most able people, presumably using, access to the large databases and, big data analysis to identify to social graph entire societies and find out who are the people who are the support structure of society. And if you, take them out because you shoot them to bits with microwave weapons, you have removed the resilience of the society. At first, it will not be obvious, just like when they shot all the intellectuals in the head in Poland, the Gestapo, the devastating effect wasn't obvious when the bodies dropped dead down onto the pavement. Minus those people who were dead, the society looked just the same. But then came the next stage, at which point that society couldn't defend itself anymore because it had a communication issue. These intellectuals were not around to articulately communicate complex situations to them. And that's what it's about. What these intellectuals did is analyze, if you like, complex systems and articulately communicate it to the rest of the population what was going on and what they had to do. If you shoot these people in the head, they can't communicate that, and this society is defenseless. Okay, now I'm telling you the same thing is happening now, and it's now down to you to open your eyes and see that that's the case. Look at Ramola, who's being assaulted. Look at Karen Stewart. Look at myself, and ask yourself, do we come across as the most mendacious, deceitful lot you've ever seen? Or do we come across as the people of highest integrity? If you have doubts, I think Karen Stewart did several lie detector tests throughout her history, and she's, I think, one of the most honest people in the NSA, right? You can read all the articles that Ramola is writing. All of those turned out to be true in greatest detail, and she writes those articles despite heavy artillery barrage with microwave weapons and non-stop mutilation and attempts to tear her family apart. She continues writing that stuff. If it weren't the truth, she would have stopped a long time ago, right? Similarly here, I continue being assaulted and I continue speaking up, and you can also talk to my old colleagues, and I don't think there's one person who can accuse me of lying or being particularly thick. You know, if you find one, I would love to know their name and have a chat with them, but you know, just to reacquaint them with my persona. Clearly their memory got muddled, but this is it. So how come the women of highest integrity are being shot to pieces by the intelligence agencies? And this is the underlying structure. The underlying structure is that the network of global corporate control is trying to remove the intellectual elite to prepare a full-blown takeover, so that we cannot analyze complex systems fast and we cannot communicate it to you. And that's what it's about. So the question is, what is that big takeover? And plan A is a world war. This is plan A. Now, plan A is not a nuclear world war, because I think everybody is clever enough, even in so-called military intelligence, to figure out that no one will survive that. So plan A is a staged world war, where they take all the intelligence agencies around the world and the military, you know, and the network of global corporate control plays essentially sock puppets. So, you know, below the line, you can see my two arms are connected. But if this is all you see, it's like one side starting a war against the other side, and then they go, rawr, you know. And it's like, it's pretending that there were two sides, but actually these two are just different branch offices of the same entity, the one agency. And it was already the one agency during the First World War, which was staged. It was the one agency during the Second World War, which was staged. Communism was staged. That's why Western and Eastern spies were just going like that all the time. You know, they were talking to each other, they were exchanging. Of course, on the spy level, there's still some action. You know, these people need to be kept entertained, but ultimately it was just an entire big fucking show. Because at the very top, the people who were trying to grab assets in Russia and trying to hold on to assets in the West were the same people. So, you know, it was like freaking nonsense. And they owned the CIA and the KGB and MI6 already, had done so for a very long time. So this is all nonsense, okay? So systems analysis tells us that all these intelligence agencies are one. And sometimes, remember that what we're dealing with is a tower of psychopaths. So you've got senior psychopaths bullshitting the psychopaths in the tier below. Okay, and they have to bullshit them to keep them under control. So when you've got people who are the head of MI6, MI5, they have to be really heavily bullshitted by psychopaths above them to be able to contain them, right? Because being the head of MI6, if you did have your head out of your rectum, you would be freaking powerful and you could actually get shit done, right? But that's why the name of the game is to keep these people utterly with their heads so far up their rectum that they couldn't do anything even if they tried. Okay, that is it. Now the question is, how do you actually achieve that? And God, I don't even want to go into that, but to just give you a rough idea, you could do that by abusing them as children, by splitting their mind with MK Ultra Monarch type sort of, you know, mind splitting, mind fuck programming. You could do it many ways, but usually in young boys, kind of anally raping them until they lose their will, usually does it, as it seems to be the case. And if you wanted to groom a head of MI5, MI6, you would want to do something like that, you know. And of course, you know, this person shouldn't be totally messed up, so they should have some sort of way to cover it up. But if you know what to look for, you might spot signs. Okay, so this is how you could do it. You could also try to pick serial killers or pedophiles so that they have a control file on them. And then you can control them with that, you know, and so on and so on. So when you read newspaper articles in Britain accusing heads of military intelligence about, you know, of being pedophiles, you think, oh, okay, it's that option. Out of the very limited range of options of how you can control a psychopath, oh, it's that. Okay, fine. So it doesn't, it's not a surprise, you know. It's not a surprise, it's a freaking program, you know. Because someone who is properly normal, as high integrity, if you made it to the top of MI6, that would be like the end of the cartel, right? So you can't have that. So you have to have these people to have something on them, okay? And they have to be psychopaths to make it to the top. So in case you think I'm talking utter rubbish, right, I would like to play you some things. I would like to play you a clip. And don't worry, all of this is now fitting the puzzle pieces together. So stay with me, please. It will make sense, but we really have to analyze what sort of people we're dealing with, because I am trying to get through to the heads of the intelligence agencies. I've tried to get through to MI5, I tried to get through to the BND, and I'm trying now desperately to get through to the NDB to explain to them all of these countries, every single European country, but especially those that I can, you know, say under oath in court, are running death camp experiments. And this means that all of those countries are to be invaded, okay? It's really quite simple, you know, that's what it means. And the cartel is already there, so what is the cartel doing? It's trying to invade them even more, and we'll get onto that. But for some reason, these people just do not understand. I mean, they're not mathematicians, right? So I'm not expecting some sort of intellectual high flying here, but they just do not get it. So we should spend some time analyzing the psychology of these people and analyzing their past and figuring out what exactly is holding them back. What sort of people are they? What has been done to them? And what the F is holding these people back? Because whatever it is, they really need to get their head out of their ass like by yesterday. But for some reason they can't. So let's just have a look. Now what I would like you to start off with is, don't just take my word for it. I want to play a clip and then I want to analyze the clip. So the clip I'm playing, and I will include the link below, is called MI6, A Century in the Shadows. And it's a preview, a little trailer, a minute and a half, by the BBC Radio. So I'm going to play it, and I'm not going to do anything fancy because the actual images is nothing to see. It's just an aerial image of the MI6 building and, you know, showing it. So these are MI6 agents, and I want you to listen to the actual text being said, because there will be sound bites from MI6 agents and MI5 agents, you know, and listen carefully to what they say. Remember, this is just randomly, you know, picked out, so, you know, the context is missing here, okay? But doesn't matter. These snippets already, I personally think, are enough for a PhD. So let's just have a look. So I'm just going to play it, and you will just hear it in the background, and just listen to the words about how they say it, and I'll explain who is saying that, you know? Okay, so here we go.
I can feel the adrenaline sort of pumping through when I think back to some of the things that I, many others, were required to do.
So that was Sir John Scarlett, if I'm not mistaken. And he says he can feel the adrenaline pumping through when he thinks about the things that he and others have been required to do. Now let's just think about this for a second. And again, remember, this is taken out of context. But you can hear the excitement. I had to smile as soon as I heard it, because it's like, that's the resonance. It's like, you can hear the excitement. You can hear the beat pattern and the way he says that, and that this is a good thing. You know, for him, this is a good thing. For me, as a systems analysis, I just think, oh my Lord. You know, this guy did not say, well, you know, for example, something to the effect, I mean, it sounds really boring, right? But that's exactly the point of, you know, I remember just how hard we used to think about what exactly to do, you know. Now, had he said that, or something to the effect of, you know, how carefully they did everything and how long they agonized and thought through absolutely everything that they did, the bigger implications, and, you know, you can't imagine the sophistication of our simulations and the analysis we're doing, I would have been a lot more reassured, because we're dealing with complex systems. But no, he's focusing on the excitement. Now, this man, purely statistically speaking, without knowing anything further about him, I could just use systems analysis and say he was the head of MI6. Statistically speaking, he must be a psychopath. If he weren't, he wouldn't have made it to the top of MI6, right? So, you know, so he's going to be a thrill seeker. And here we have it, the thrill seeking, the adrenaline pumping through, right? Thinking about the things that he and others were required to do. So these people are required to do something that really gives you an adrenaline rush, okay? But did anybody ever, out of him and the others, like ask, guys, like, what the fuck are we doing? Like, why the fuck are we doing this, ever? Because I would say not. Because of the compartmentalization, they wouldn't have known why the F they're doing that. So Sir John Scarlett is most certainly not focusing on the critical thinking aspect of this, you know, matters when he's advertising MI6. He's focusing on the thrill, the adrenaline, and being required to do something. Now, or, you know, the things we were required to do. It's at first you don't spot it, but it is an odd. If you just think about it for long enough, you realize that we were required to do. It has a bit of the public school, you know, being kind of regimented by, you know, young boys being regimented by older men sort of thing, being required to do something, like a hint of S&M sort of like compulsion-y thing somehow going on. So if you know about the details, none of this is surprising. Why am I banging on about it? Because it's freaking important, because it goes to the heart of the matter. So we have, okay, this was Sir John Scarlett, the thrill seeker, the thrills, all right? And there will be more about this. But now let's listen to the next one.
Well, there have been other times in my life where I have been involved in death, yes. But I can't talk about that.
Now, I'm not 100% familiar with these people, but I think, maybe I'm getting this wrong, but I would guess that that was, I think, Eliza Manningham Buller, possibly. Suddenly, for some reason, that's the image that jumped into my head. Maybe I'm getting these ladies wrong, but I think that was her. If it was, then, and she talks about being involved in death, well, my word, I know nothing, and I have not written a thing about these people, okay? So don't rip my head off. But it is a fact that there are these blog entries called MI5 and MI6 Exposed, accusing trainers of trainee spies in the 1970s, I think, or early 1980s, of just, I think it was the 70s, of committing murder of trainee spies. And I think there was a phrase of, you know, one of these women was murdered. She was bumped off because she was too ugly to be run as a prostitute. Okay. And then if it's the same woman, I think there's also other accusations, like much more horrific, to do with like ritual sacrifice, and you know, like I don't even want to get into that. I can't check the veracity of these blogs, right? And I don't know the origin. It seems a bit out there that someone would just randomly make it up and put it out on the website, you know, but then again, you know, it's like in the spy world, that's also not that unusual, but it seems to be very specific. And funnily enough, every aspect that I read in those blogs, I came across in other places. For example, the satanistic rituals, right? And then I've got a satanic black goat, like over there, a freaking life-size goat. And I've tweeted the images, so you can find it on my tweets. Like, okay, maybe this shit's true, right? Maybe they're all Satanists and they fuck children and they sacrifice children and they murder other people. If that were the case, then listen to it again. There have been other times in my life where I've been involved in death. Okay. Is it to do with the goats? But I can't talk about that. And listen again. Listen to it 16 times if you must, and absorb the beat, the speed, and the way people say that. Because, as I say, just on these things you can write a PhD, if you know where to look. Okay, so there's another head of MI6, or maybe it's not Manningham-Bala. Wasn't she MI5? And maybe this is I keep getting confused. It doesn't matter. It's those people, and they all have to be pretty psychopathic to get to that stage. And I don't mean that as a smear or something. I'm just saying as a statistical fact. Okay, I would just assume that they are. So psychopaths being involved in death is not too surprising. And then you have this sort of instant, I'm being shot into the face. Actually, you can't see it, but I'm holding it, here, because they're shooting through my face, through my eye, through my nose, into my eye socket. So, oh God. It's like, pulsed microwave shots through the wall from my dear neighbor here on this side. Okay, but she can't talk about that, of course, right? Compartmentalization. If there was any sort of involvement in death that weren't, the right thing to do, if there ever was, then you wouldn't hear about that. Okay. So that's another thing to keep in mind, okay? So some death involved, you can't talk about that. And now the next one.
Ici, non. Les Français parlent au français.
All the diplomats are spies. All of them.
So, if I understood the words correctly, so one of them was a French saying that, over here we speak French, okay? Maybe that's an insider joke in MI6, quite possibly. But then the sentence of all the diplomats are spies, all of them. Well, of course they are. Of course they are, right? You've got these foreign missions, and then you would plonk your spies there, right? So this is also why, if the BND is shooting me to bits and I'm trying to get the help of the German ambassador, Dr. Otto Lampe, he does not just jack shit. When I'm trying to call his embassy, the phone line keeps being sabotaged. When I'm trying to talk to Miss Richter, the caseworker who dealt with my case, she's on one time she's in a funny numbered meeting, and she already went home, then she was ill, she's like, every single excuse in the spy book. And then when I actually call and I get through to Miss Ursula Braumann, she just can't be asked. She's almost says to me with a smirk over the phone, I said, I've exhausted all legal possibilities here in Switzerland. There's one of the highest profile lawyers put it to me in writing. I need the help of the embassy to stop this targeting. She's like, we can't do anything. But like, literally, as if we were talking about a garden party. Oh, I'm really sorry, we can't do anything. You just have to accept that that's the situation. So I just have to accept that I'm in a concentration camp, and I'm being mutilated to death by a bunch of fucking Nazis. And the German embassy tells me that I just have to put up, like, you know, we can't do anything, that you're in a death camp that, you know, you were put into by British and German intelligence. We can't do anything. Why can't they do anything? It's because they are the fucking Nazis, that's why. That's why. Or they're Nazi collaborators. You know, if Miss Ursula Braumann isn't actually one of the Nazis arranging my shooting, she certainly collaborates with them by being a spy. Right? That's why. She's an agent. She's an agent. Anybody who wasn't an agent, if we had a real ambassador, this would be the task for an ambassador to avoid, you know, avert World War III. But we haven't. The German ambassador is not an ambassador. He's an agent of the BND. And this clip is important for this reason, because totally independent of me, there's another person saying all diplomats are spies. All of them. Yes. And when the intelligence agencies have now entirely infiltrated and subverted and made their own the diplomatic missions, you know, and at the same time the intelligence agencies are now used to annihilate the population. You can't go to the embassy anymore for humanitarian requests because the ambassador will be part of the deep capture. That's the problem. And the same applies also to the press. The press has been infiltrated and subverted by the intelligence agencies, so the victims cannot go to the press, because those are not journalists, they are agents. That's why I couldn't go. I tried to speak to Luke Harding at The Guardian, and he just laughed at me. I told him, Luke, it's not just about me, it's about also British people being mutilated to death. He couldn't give a shit. Why? Because he's an agent. He is part of the system that's in deep capture. He couldn't give a flying fuck. But also independent, I think the book is in my library next door. He also wrote a book called Mafia State, where he says that the KGB harassed him because they thought he was an agent. Well, it looks like the KGB was right. You know, I mean, yeah, they figured that one out. So that's what we're dealing with. We now have these degenerates in the intelligence agencies who have now entirely subverted the diplomatic missions, and they have entirely subverted the mainstream newspapers and also large parts of the alternative media. They are all agents. We have this proliferating organization of degenerates running the country into the ground, you know. So what to do about it? What to do about it? I mean, that's the real question. And as I said, China's solution was to execute the head of intelligence. And when it gets this bad, that's, you know, the Chinese wouldn't have done it if it hadn't been the only option, the last, you know, remaining option. Now, should it come to the situation whereby the West realizes that this is so bad that they have to do something drastic and they have to execute one of their heads of intelligence, I would just say we're now running seriously out of time because of this. So we're now here on corruption. We need to stop the directed energy weapons. If you assassinate or execute a current head of MI5 and MI6, the Chinese could do it because they had more time. We don't have time anymore. So the intelligence agencies need to understand that the death camps have to be stopped by them, like by yesterday, you know. And if you assassinate the head of MI5, MI6, this will introduce a delay. You know, you have to recruit somebody else, they have to settle into the new post, they have to be accepted by all the other psychopaths, yada, 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 yada. And that takes time. Okay? We don't have the time anymore. So what do? Well, you could then execute an ex-head of MI6 or MI5. And, you know, I mean, sorry, it would set a sign, you know, because it would be like the heads up. If you don't do this, you'll be next, you know. This is a warning shot. And of course, if you wanted to execute, you know, a head of an intelligence agency, remember that this is now, it sounds drastic for civil society, and it's to realize we're not in a civil society sort of situation anymore. We're at war. ladies and gentlemen, we are at war. So now the rules of war apply, and also that's why we have court-martials separate from the civilian courts, because sometimes the situation and requirements of war are such that, you know, to survive you have to kill, and civil courts might not understand it the way that people do who have been involved in war. So to survive we have to kill, but not the people who they're killing now, which is women and children and the intellectuals, right, and people of high integrity. Sadly, we need to kill at the top of the intelligence agencies to set a sign. So, you know, killing a current head would not be an option, so killing a former head of MI6, and I don't advocate that either, but I do advocate pointing a gun at their head ASAP and saying, well, you know, you either move some levers here or else. And of course, when you have to pick them, you know, that's kind of like, they don't really have an an official duty, so it's almost like unfair. But, you know, if somebody would actually volunteer, then that would be good. And as it turns out, somebody did volunteer in writing here, and that's Sir John Scarlett, because he himself says, and I point to this in previous videos. He says, as the bureaucracy becomes more, he's talking about MI6, as the bureaucracy becomes more established, it develops its own career structure. It is less dependent, and should be less dependent, on individual personalities. Absolutely no one is indispensable. Absolutely no one is indispensable. When I first read that, that was, first of all, it's wrong from a systems analysis point of view, but it was also one of the most callous things I read, because it means that everybody is dispensable. Everybody in MI6 is dispensable. But then when I was trying to solve the problem of who would volunteer, you know, for preemptive assassination to set a sign to the current heads of MI5 and MI6, I realized that, you know, Sir John has volunteered, because he is an ex-head of MI6, and as he said, no one is indispensable in MI6. And, you know, when he said that comment, that included himself. So he put in writing that he is dispensable. And we should all thank Sir John for his sacrifice for his country, because we really need a sacrifice like that to stop this. So, given that that was his own assessment about his colleagues and the organization, and it includes himself, you know, given that Sir John, by his own stepping forward, is dispensable, the gun should be pointed at his head. And it has to be pointed very, very quickly. Sir John does have excellent connections. I think he is, I think he was interviewed in a townhouse owned by Morgan Stanley, an American investment bank that employs him as an advisor. This was back in 2011. I think he's now an advisor for many other things as well. So this man has got excellent connections. If he wanted to help us stop the death camps and avoid World War III, he certainly would be very good. So pointing a gun at his head would have the double benefit that he would get going, and the current head of MI6 would get going too, knowing that he would be next after the trigger has been pulled. Now, also there's a lot of nuggets here in this paper, and one of the things is that, again, there's this quote of the thrill, you know, it's here in this article. By the way, I'm reading from John Scarlett, MI6 has no room for mavericks. It appeared in the Telegraph on the 9th of May 2011, and in that article it also says, you know, there's some episodes that lend glamour to intelligence work, but is day-to-day reality less thrilling, even a little dull? And he says, no, it's not. I was in the intelligence world for 38 years, and I don't think I had a boring day. Again, the thrills, you know, all of us who've been trying to, you know, work really hard. At CERN, God, I did have not just boring days, I had frustrating days, you know, trying to think really hard about a solution and not coming up with one, you know, because I had to think even harder and spend a lot of time thinking about it a lot. But it sounds like an MI6, there isn't a fat lot of that going on. So, yeah. Then also, I mean, I've pointed to this before, but I should point to this again because it's so important. It says, number one, you know, MI6, this is Sir John speaking, MI6 is one of a very small number of intelligence services capable of doing an effective job if necessary, almost anywhere in the world. The skills of the British intelligence community are a great national asset. Why though, and this is the interviewer asking, why though should we, a medium-sized power on the fringe of Western Europe, spend hundreds of millions of pounds, by the way, I think it's in the billions at least, spying on the world? If we are heading for Belgian-sized navy, then why not have a Belgian-sized intelligence apparatus? Sir John says, I have absolutely no expectation that any of that will happen. I think that's a fantasy. It's a non-issue as far as I'm concerned. Of course, because of shedding. Of course, it can't just be wound down because this thing, this military intelligence conglomerate, it's not just the system churns out alumni, sheds them, and they proliferate extra intelligence agencies being virtual carbon copies of MI6. Of course, this just can't be shut down. By the way, this problem won't even be stopped when we shut down MI6 because of these extra companies, so something has to happen. So Sir John is certainly right, and then the question is, so intelligence will remain a core British industry? And Sir John replies, yes. Core British industry, remember that, you know, intelligence is sabotage. It's sabotage. It is sabotaging someone else's effort. Now, when you have got this sabotage, when you've got sabotage as core British industry, is that a good thing? No, because when these people run out of work, they will sabotage their own assets. They will sabotage their own country. And that's what's happening with the shedding from these organizations, you know. Oof, okay, but there's of course not a fat lot of discussion about this danger, which is the biggest national security issue, you know, we're facing right now, but of course that's not going to be discussed. Gosh, I mean, I could write a PhD about all of this as well. But then there's another thing, and that goes to the heart of the matter. And as Sir John says, when I first joined, I went for years knowing very little indeed about the history of my own organization, despite being a keen amateur historian. It is quite difficult to understand what sort of organization you work for unless you have a good understanding of its past. Yes, especially in a compartmentalized organization. And what you have to understand looking at its past is that it's ancient. For example, this article contains one bit of total misinformation, which is a description of the beginnings of SIS, being the Secret Intelligence Service, otherwise known as MI6. So it says the beginnings of the SIS could hardly have been more modest, blah, 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 blah. And then it's talking about Mansfield coming, and it says, equipped with a small office and a secretary, coming, the first C, was C being the letter C, as in the code letter for the head of MI6, was faced with the daunting task of building an intelligence service virtually from scratch. Nonsense! Nonsense! You're telling me this guy coming, when did he live? Did he live in like the 12th century or something? I don't think so. He had to build an intelligence service from scratch. My rear side. There was already a sprawling intelligence conglomerate in the 16th century. This guy built jack all from scratch. If anything, he built a new tiny branch office himself. I mean, you know, but not an intelligence service. So, no. So when Sir John Scarlett says, you know, he understood very little of what sort of organization he worked for, yeah, you know, if this quote is by him and not by the journalist, he still understands very little about that organization, because it's just, MI6 is just the newest seedling of a structure that has been around for a very long time and has been owned forever by the network of global corporate control that in itself has been around for a very long time. So yeah, so much about that. God, there's also wonderful nuggets here. I mean, you never know if this is serious or if it's tongue-in-cheek, but you know, it's he arrives and he's talking to the photographer, and this is the year 2011. Okay, so you know, the photographer is taking presumably some pictures, and then soon it says now here in the article, soon he is peering into the back of the camera. What do you do with all the ones you don't use? He asks in a friendly, frosty kind of way. One detects a touch of a previous life when the people trying to get a clear mugshot of him were the KGB. I mean, this is hilarious because the guy in the year 2011 is using a digital camera. So, you know, it's not about film anymore. In the olden days, for those of you who don't remember, there used to be film. And then you could ask, what do you do with the ones you don't use? And, you know, it's hilarious. I think that's a joke by Sir John. He seems like he's got humor. And then the question is, how would you ever, you know, reply to that, knowing that, you know, you can duplicate these numbers, as, you know, or these photos as often as you like. And I don't know. I guess the best way to answer that is, I mean, what do you do with all the ones you don't use? I don't know. Put it up on Hot or Not and Grindr and have bets of, you know, what sort of responses they invite? I don't know. So yeah. Okay, so there's all this going on, but then there's more. There's, I think, a fantastic nugget somewhere here in another article. You should really read this because it says a lot about what's going on. And by the way, all this is relevant. I'm not just blathering on here, you know, for my own entertainment. You have to understand, but you have to look at the data. You have to look at the data and you have to understand what sort of people you're dealing with. Now, there's one bit about Sir John that I found very interesting, which was, let me find it. It was hang on, let me find it. Yeah, I think it's somewhere here. Hang on, I have to find this bit because here, I found it, I'm sorry. So I mentioned that some in the service make fun of his fondness for expensive, well-tailored suits. Apparently, according to some psychiatrists, that's classic psychopath. It's the dominance signaling, you know, wearing suits and sort of stuff, you know. You wouldn't think it, but expensive, well-tailored suits. And, you know, I mean, this is not just any old, you know, well-tailored suits. It's about MI6 swimming in money, all of them probably being very well dressed, and this guy sticks out because he's a different category. Okay, but he also has a reputation as one of MI6's first new men. At a time when this wasn't an accepted part of culture, he had a very enlightened approach to the recruitment of women, one official says, and he was always their champion when it came to allocating operational roles. Now that's interesting. That is really interesting, in fact, and it could mean very many things. But this is really interesting. At some point, it occurred to me. I mean, maybe people know, but you know, maybe this is obvious. But places like MI6 traditionally were, you know, mostly gay. And, you know, people observe this in the past, you know, you have the Gestapo and the Waffen-SS, and suddenly people realize, hang on, they're all these militant gay guys, you know, yeah. There's a system analysis reason for that. It's like a selection process, you know, and when it's about spying, I mean, there are two reasons. Number one, it's very secretive, right? So very close knit, and the the closest knit community is the one that sleeps with each other, right? Okay. Then also you can use the sort of, it's not just women who sleep themselves to the top and infiltrate organizations, it's also men. So you've got these gay guys who can be just planted elsewhere and then sleep their way into powerful positions. So that's another reason, but there are many reasons why that was the case. And when I read that, I thought, could it have been the case that in those days John Scarlett was actually, it's like the inverse of the only gay in the village. Was he the only straight guy at MI6? And this guy emphasizes at a time when this wasn't an accepted part of the culture, he was championing women. What must that have been like? Like, he actually wants to put women into operational roles, and his senior colleagues are like, William, do you think John is, well, what do you call it? Do you think he is, like, I don't know how to put it, but do you think he's, like, different? And this guy's like, what do you mean? Well, I mean, like, look at it. He keeps recruiting women, right? He takes them on, like, missions and stuff. He's quite keen on having them around. Do you think he's actually, like, sorry, I forget the term, what's used these days? Do you think he's straight? And the other guy's like, what do you mean straight? What monstrous accusation? Surely we've got recruitment filters against that sort of thing here at MI6. Okay, well, is that what it was? Like, he thought, oh God, I've joined this organization, as he put it. He just didn't realize what sort of organization he had joined. He's like, okay, it's a sausage fest for sure. They seem to be having a lot of fun, but yeah, there's something missing. And he's like, hey guys, what if we just I don't know, took some women, honeypots along to these missions, like as eye candy? I don't know, I marvel. But one of the things that actually is a serious point is that if you have this background that MI6 was actually predominantly gay for a long time, then look carefully at what happened to whistleblowers. And now I'm making a serious statistical point here. Look carefully. And not just at MI6, look at also at the military and other people. Look at what happens to whistleblowers. And I just would like to point out, totally independently of each other, for your own personal musings, I want to point out that Chelsea Manning became a woman. I want to point out that David Schuyler, who's an MI5/MI6 whistleblower, is I think now a transvestite, and then I would like to point out that Gareth Williams, the math prodigy working for GCHQ on loan, with MI6, as I understand, was found dead in his flat with a lot of women's clothes strewn around the premises. Now, what I also would like to say is that Chelsea Manning started off as a man. David Schuyler had a girlfriend, Annie Mashan, and then I would like to point out that Gareth Williams was found, as I understand, wrapped in a sports bag that was zipped closed. The handles of the sports bag had the Velcro, wrapping put on, and the bathtub was, as I understand, partially filled with water, and that's how he was found, and with a lot of women clothes strewn around the flat. And I think that was even an MI6 safe house that he was found in. So I guess if you would have an organization with a lot of gay guys and they want to really denigrate one of theirs, they couldn't call him gay, could they? Because it's like, yeah, but we're MI6, right? So, so would they call them women? Would they try to portray them as dressing, cross-dressing, dressing up as women? Would they try to turn them into women And would they try to induce the desire to become women? That's something for you to keep in mind. And maybe run some statistical analysis in the background. So, the reason why all of this is hugely important, because you probably by now you wonder why, is because we have to understand the system that groomed these people. We have to understand it. And the system that recruited, I was trying to explain to you the personalities, I was trying to explain to you the situation, and now the system that recruits them. When you are recruiting these MI6 agents, you will groom them for features of psychopathology, but you will also groom them for controllability, okay? And then you would want to control them with control files. Control files, you know, by that time were things like homosexuality, not anymore, not really. This is certainly not in MI6, I mean, come on, right? It has to be something like serial killers, pedophilia, or something on them. They would have to be psychopaths, but they would have to be controlled by an upper layer of psychopaths. So whatever they did would have also been induced with whatever was done to them. Okay? I would assume. And this system is ancient. Now, if a man is, you know, groomed by this system, are there any indications for what the system was trying to do to them? And this is hugely important actually here. This is pivotal. I mean, I keep being shot in the head, and I wish they would stop this nonsense, because they don't understand. Like, no one understands this bit. If they, the system that groomed them would try to control them. And it would try to control them through trauma, number one. But it would also try to control them. Sorry, I'm being shot into so hard I can actually hear the popping in my head. It's like cavitation, you know, it's terrible. And I encourage you to read these blog pages called MI5 and MI6 Exposed, and just read them. In one instant, you have one of the things that's said is that Sir John Scarlett had a nickname, and that was Eggman. And that's what they called him. And in the blog post it says that, you know, he lost his hair at an early age, and his colleagues thought that was amusing. Now again, these are these little nuggets that actually mean the earth if you analyze it carefully, because what you have to understand is that the system that groomed him was severely psychopathic, and it would want to control him. So it would want to go for ostensibly his weakness and turn it into a control lever. And what kept being said on these sites was this nickname. So making fun about the fact that he lost his hair at an early age. Why would that? It was clearly used to try to maybe hurt him, maybe, you know, kind of denigrate him. That's what these psychopaths are doing. The psychopaths above him now. Why would that be used? Maybe because it's embarrassing for young men, okay. But then there's an extra edge to it, and for that you have to know that if you want to control a person, you would want to control their most dangerous aspect, you know, the most dangerous aspect about them, with which they could be dangerous to you. You would want to control that. How would that be dangerous? It's because, as I understand it, that is linked to testosterone levels. So high testosterone levels will, as I understand, lead to boldness. Now, when you have this early onset boldness, it actually indicates very high testosterone levels. And that is dangerous to the men who want to control him, because, you know, essentially what this is saying is that this guy's got balls. This guy's got some real balls, if you want to really cut it down, you know. And yes, and he's like going all out to recruit women. Yeah, okay. So, you know, but for an organization where senior psychopaths are trying to control him, they would want to take the edge off that. So they would want to, ironically, they honed in on the one aspect that makes him really dangerous to them. And they want to somehow pull him down, you know. And it's very interesting because you see it over and over. And they have essentially a weapon, and they want the edge, the blade, not to be pointing at them, because that's when it's dangerous. So they are trying, the most dangerous thing that they identified, maybe subconsciously, is actually his testosterone, the fact that this guy actually's got some balls. And they are mocking that. They are making it look like it's an actually bad thing. I mean, for women, I'm as a woman personally, I can tell you, I mean, maybe that's not true for all women, but certainly for a lot of women I know, they don't actually care about boldness. So, and it's for evolutionary reasons, because it's indicating testosterone levels. So, you know, that's not a problem. But they wanted to turn that into a weapon, and they themselves gave the game away by honing in on that one thing. So that's one example. The other example that was mentioned on these pages, MI5 and MI6 Exposed, is it was saying how, and I think that was Eliza Manningham-Poller, is that again, this is like, I didn't write this. I'm just trying to read what somebody else got into their head to write, and I assume if this were true, what would it imply? So please don't rip my head off, like you already are doing, but you know, anyway. And what this was, it was saying, first of all, that she was in fact a man, so she was a, what's it called, a hermaphrodite, and so she was born with both, you know, sexes in a sense, so both sexual features, and then she was turned into a woman. And it also said that there was one, I think it sounded like a human sacrifice ritual, whereby, you know, this woman was meant to perform some sort of human sacrifice, and then I think the woman was cut up, and her intestines and her womb was, you know, mutilated or something like that. So that's the sort of stuff that's in these blog posts about MI5 and MI6. So you have to have the stomach to read that sort of stuff. Again, I can't check if this is true or not. But what might be relevant is if it were true, what would it say about the system? And the blog post even mentioned that that very much looks like womb envy. Now, I'm not sure if this is a true story, if the kids are adopted or whatever, it doesn't matter. If it were true, then aside from the murders and so on, what would it say about the system? Because the system is important. It would again try to take the one aspect that would make this woman most dangerous to the system and somehow make her hate that. Take the most powerful thing about her and make her hate that about herself. Now, why would it be powerful? You know, in a sense, what she would hate is the fact that she doesn't have a womb, she can't have children of her own. You know, in that sense, she wouldn't be like other women. So, yeah, if this woman cut another woman open and, you know, was doing horrible things to the womb, that, yeah, womb envy just kind of, you know, is right on the money. But why would she feel that? Well, it's because the system would have instilled it in her that she has to hate herself for exactly that. Why would it hone on you know, that aspect? It's because her being both, in a sense, she would have been born with male and female features at the same time. But what it most of the time doesn't say is that that is also mirrored by structures in the brain. And having a male and the brain, a female brain and a male brain in one is hugely powerful, because she can understand men and she can understand women, or if you like, she can understand men and think like a woman. You know, which, given in an organization where not a fat lot of thinking seems to be happening, might be a good thing. But then again, in an organization like that, thinking is deadly to the organization. So do you see, if you read these weird stories like that, totally disjointed nuggets and you understand what does it say about the system, it tells you an awful lot. So it tells you that these men and women have been recruited, have been made to hate the aspect of themselves that makes them dangerous to the system, that makes them actually their strongest aspect, their most powerful aspect, they have to hate. That's what it means. So it's this psychopathic system sucking them in and using it for its own benefit. And you have to understand this in great detail to really understand the system, okay? And what's going on with that system. Now, at that point, and now I come on to the really, really important aspects, you have these people, and we have to cycle the system because there's this foreign entity called the Network of Global Corporate Control that has now put all the intelligence agencies into deep capture. And what this entire system is drawn up to do, it is using the features of everybody to take down the system. So it would be using everybody's natural behavior for full-blown takedown operation. How would that work in practice? Well, the system is set up that everybody continues doing what they would be doing anyway, and this would lead to overall a takedown of the system, a takedown of our Western society. So how would that look? Well, you get these people in, you traumatize them, you make them hate their most powerful aspect about themselves, and then you unleash them with their frustrations on the general population. And then you make them recruit more spies. I think it was Manning Mbala who was in charge of recruiting. Like, she requested in 2003 an expansion of the budget, and the budget was doubled. So the budget of MI5 doubled, the manpower tripled, and the operations increased by a factor of 5. Now, for those of us who are, the victims of the intelligence agencies, we know that the vast majority of those operations are a total waste of money and time. But that was not the point. The point was to take down the UK. That's why no country in the world can survive a doubling of its intelligence agency. It can't, because these people don't do anything useful. So the doubling of the budget of MI5 was the preparation of the takedown operation on the UK. And the budgets have been increased significantly in Germany and also in Switzerland. And now they're running death camps publicly, and they can't be stopped because they got addicted to this sort of money. They got addicted to their job. And that's exactly how the system is designed to operate. That's exactly what it's designed to do. And it's using everybody's weakness. It's using the fact that, the head of MI5 hates women. The head of MI6 loves women. Maybe so much that, he's trafficking them. And then you take these people with their predilections and you unleash it onto the members of highest integrity in your population. And you just wait for these people to rip them apart. So and they would do it in autopilot. They would take out their own countries. And I think this is precisely what has been set up. And this entire system is reliant on the particular features of all these intelligence agents. It's reliant on the particular features of the victims, and it expects from us that we all behave in exactly the way that we expect it to do. Expect it to behave. So, I would say the way to step out is for those people who hate women to stop doing that, right? To those people who have really a lot of balls but have somehow been held back to actually find their balls and go up against the people who have been holding them down one way or another. It's also means that the people who are thrill seekers have to start thinking very hard and very long, like I would do for long, parts of my day, think really hard about things. And that people like myself who are thinking very hard and very long, they have to go out and not quite seek thrills, but, do stuff that is dangerous and that they are not expected to do. They're not expected to have the wherewithal to do that. So all of us, if you want to stop the system, if you want to, this is again about the turning the Titanic. I'm saying we can't turn the Titanic. We have to come up with something else, right? What we have to do is ignore the instructions from the ship captain, because he's paid by the network of global corporate control. He's paid for by the bankers. Don't listen to the ship captain. You have to think of something, and you have to do the complete opposite of what you're doing. If you're the head of MI6, right, you need to find your balls, you need to break your Monarch MK Ultra programming, and you have to turn on your handlers, right? If you are now set up to fire microwave weapons into me, you have to stop, and you have to understand that if you're firing microwave weapons into me, what you're doing, dear NDB, here in Switzerland, is you are advertising to every foreign power that you haven't understood neither history nor current affairs, and you are still totally oblivious to the fact that you are to be invaded. And I made this point before. If you wanted to invade Western Europe, there are some things, bits and pieces to get here and there, but if you wanted to go for the prize assets, you'd come here to Switzerland. You'd come here to what very much looks like the NATO HQ. You'd pick up, miscellaneous things, stuff in the vaults and many, many other things, right? So I'm just saying, if you are mutilating me publicly, as you've now done, and if you're resistant to police, public and private, for you to cease and desist, you are advertising to the foreign powers that it's all systems go. The invasion can go forward because you haven't gotten your head out of your ass. Do you understand? You can stick pedophile symbols and fucking goats, at roofs, and you can shoot at me, and you will, by doing that, demonstrate to the world that you haven't understood and you're still doing what you expected to do, which is to prepare your own downfall. What Swiss, British and German intelligence is currently expected to do is to prepare the takedown of these countries. And that's what you're doing. It's a myth. I'm trying to explain that every tier of the system is set up such that by running on your own predilections, you will do what you expected to do, by running on your own impulses. And what is this? On the lowest level, the gang stalkers and the degenerates who've been stalking me just tonight are getting off on entertainment. Okay? So they are getting off on the perving, the harassing another woman, or harassing a woman when they're men. The men who were doing this tonight were mostly men. Sorry, it's almost 4 a.m, so I'm really tired. But one layer up, it's the perving lot, right? So you have the wancursions being organized by MI5 and MI6 to come and perv at trafficked women who are being maimed and mutilated, and you've got the old guys yanking one off over watching a woman, struggling. And the system is, set up to do that. Then one level up, it's about, you are told that, oh yes, we're now doing brain mapping and it's hive minds, and then people like Robert Duncan can, play, like a little boy without ever thinking of, hang on guys, what the fuck are we doing? Not once actually thinking, hang on guys, what's the big picture here? Because if he did that for 1 second, he'd realize that what he's doing is a really bad idea. So you have at that tier, these men who are just sitting around and they're just like tinkering, and they feel so pleased when they can move your limbs remotely, and they microwave your brain, not understanding that they are microwaving the prize assets of their nation. They are microwaving the few people who understand complex systems and who could save their arse. But then as you keep analyzing the system and you keep going up and up and up, you realize that at the tier of the oligarchs, because for these reasons the ecosystems are collapsing, the economy is stalling, this cannot be stopped. We have to really throw everything here into reverse. We have to stop this and stop that and cycle these two. Okay? Now for the cartel holders, all I can say is that we are steering towards a really big non-linearity to do with ecosystems ultimately. But there are other aspects, finance and economy will play into it. And for the first time in history, there will be the biggest asset grab possible. Then, like the biggest asset grab that humankind has ever seen. And that's within reach. So when that's coming up, everybody here and here would want to get there. Killing this person will suddenly look like a fantastic business plan. But then these two will be competing, so killing each other will be an even bigger business plan, and these people will move up. And you have this tower of psychopaths creating a high instability situation. If you don't believe me, you can look at what happened in ancient Rome at times when people start killing each other. You can look at what happened in the Vatican when popes started snuffing it at a surprisingly high rate, and so on and so on. There's many other examples as well, in banking, families, and so on. So when it's this sort of system changes, huge profits can be made by bumping each other off. So when you then look at the system, you realize that everybody has a gun pointed at everybody else's head. Okay? The oligarchs think that they're running the world, but they're really not, because they are being, they have a gun pointed at their head by these two. Now these two have a gun pointed at each other's head because they want to go there, right? Now these people have a gun pointed at his head, and so on and so on and so on. So there's gun pointing all around, and you walk in, you analyze this, you see all this, and you think, oh my God, you guys are not getting it, do you? You guys are not getting it. We have this setup towards a staged world war, but if you corner Russia, the only option it has is to, do some preemptive nukes. Of course you can change it, but there's a system instability to do with finance and to do with the ecosystem coming. So annihilating each other quickly would really pay off. But if we annihilate each other, we can't really keep the supply chains going. And that's what I'm trying to say. We are dealing with very complex systems. You can't annihilate everybody, or even a large fraction, because you will screw yourself, and so on and so on and so on. So to step out of all this, the only viable option we have is really to stop the corruption, get rid of the corrupt officials, stop the directed energy weapons, shut down the death camps, cycle finance, and Karen Hudas is our only hope. The global debt facility and Karen Hudas is the way to go. We have to do that. And if you guys don't want to kill each other, you have to do that too with us. Because I'm telling you, there's no way around this fact that if we follow the system through as it's set up, it's set up such that if you do what you would do naturally, you'll all end up dead. And it's by design. Because the people who are running this, they are trying to have all their competitors killed off, have the old guard killed off, grab the assets, and so on and so on. But it will be one big kill fest. The only way to avoid that is to cycle things in a civilized manner. So stop this, cycle that, and then we can rebuild the economy, because what we need is new business plans as well. And I can talk about that, a lot longer in a separate video. This one is long enough. But that's what we're dealing with. The system is set up such that if we all do what we'll do naturally, we are to annihilate each other. The people think that they're running the show. They really are not. They really are not. And remember that they are not mathematicians, that they are not systems analysts. they are there because they're particularly ruthless or because they're pedophiles. So not really the ideal solution. And I would also like to say that Karen keeps going on about a power transition model by the World Bank that seems to be spot on. It seems to be powered by some very, very big brains. Maybe it's powered by the insights of John Nash. And if it were the case, I would understand why he died. Because this power transition model shows that the banking cartel is to be wound down. And had he ever gone public and said this is the case, and that model is based on my brains, the banking cartel would have been shut down by midday. There would have been a capital flight away from the assets or the structures owned by the cartel, and also the kill fest would have set off, immediately. So they killed John Nash, but if you kill the mathematician, the maths still works the same. And the power transition model shows that the banking cartel is to be wound down. Now, what the banking cartel has to understand is that the global debt facility and the global currency reset is the only way it can survive. If it doesn't do that, just by hitting the external shock of that, will lead to the kill fest without any sort of alternatives of how to cycle the finance. So it will make the non-linearity even bigger, and it will kill even more people in the elites. It will kill more people in the elites. So this is what we're doing. And as I said, you should stop shooting into my head, because by shooting into my head, you advertise that you are so fucking stupid. Here in Switzerland, dear Markus Seiler, dear Andrew Parker, dear Alex Younger, and dear Dr. Bruno Karl, you're so fucking stupid that you still haven't figured out that by running your own death camp experiments, by mutilating women to death, you think you're doing experiments for the hive mind, or you're doing the depopulation program of the UN. What you're actually doing, because anybody who knows systems analysis knows that the depopulation program of the UN is bullshit. We look at Germany, it's already struggling for highly qualified people, right? We need every brain that we have, every brain cell that we have, and you're going around mutilating people to death so that you can remote control their arm. There's something not adding up here. And what's not adding up is the fact that everything, the hive minds, is just bollocks. It's another load of weaponized morons and people like Dr. Robert Duncan, who can go around building this tech and feel great about themselves, not realizing that they're part of a bigger program, which is the old conquering legacy systems, right? The whole point is not even the tech that Dr. Robert Duncan and Brian Tu talk about. The real point is the takedown operation of their country, using their own predilections and their own interests, and they are too fucking stupid to figure that out. That's what it's about. At no point does Dr. Robert Duncan go like, hang on a second, what the F am I doing here? These hive mind teams don't think, hang on a second, what the F are we doing here? And this is how senior psychopaths have set up the system so that psychopaths screw each other. That's what we're dealing with. So it's now 4 a.m. I have to go to bed. I hope this made it clear. I hope you now understand. Maybe I make a shorter version so that every last person on the planet understands, but this is what we're dealing with. Thank you for listening, and please take this in, because this is important information. And as they say, this is not a drill. Thank you for listening, and bye for now.